Imagine walking into ancient Athens during a drinking party. There is wine everywhere. Men are lying on couches. Someone is playing music. Someone is reciting poetry. Someone is making a speech about love like he is the first person in history to discover feelings. And in the middle of all this, two men are flirting so openly that if you filmed it today, the internet would start arguing before the video even finished loading. Now jump forward to ancient Rome. An emperor falls in love with a young man named Antinous. When Antinous dies, the emperor is so devastated that he builds a city in his name, fills the empire with statues of him, puts his face on coins, and has him worshipped like a god. That is not a breakup. That is an imperial-level coping mechanism. Now jump again. Pre-modern Japan. Samurai, monks, actors, poets, and aristocrats write about male beauty, male love, and male desire. Now jump to indigenous North America, where many cultures recognized people who did not fit into a simple male-female box and gave them specific social, spiritual, and ceremonial roles. Then jump back to today, where someone on the internet will still say, "This is all modern nonsense." And that is where the story gets interesting. Because the modern argument that LGBTQ people suddenly appeared recently has one tiny problem. History. A lot of it. Everywhere. For thousands of years, people loved, desired, dressed, lived, and understood gender in ways that do not fit the simple story many people were taught. So today we are asking a very dangerous question. What was the gayest time in history? And before the history teachers start sweating, yes, that title is a trap. Because ancient people did not usually think in modern categories like gay, straight, bisexual, transgender, or LGBTQ. For most of history, people did not say, "I identify as this orientation." They asked different questions. Who has power? Who has status? Who is allowed to marry? Who is allowed to inherit property? Who is masculine? Who is feminine? Who is sacred? Who is shameful? Who is useful to the family, the temple, the army, or the state? That means the past was not simply more accepting or more hateful. It was weirder and much more complicated. But if you look closely, there were periods in history where same-sex love, gender variation, and queer life were not only present, but sometimes visible, accepted, celebrated, ritualized, or even built into society. The first place most people think of is ancient Greece. And honestly, they are not wrong. Ancient Greece was not a rainbow paradise. It was a deeply patriarchal society, full of status rules, gender rules, class rules, slavery, war, and men who had way too much confidence while wearing very little clothing. But within that world, male-male desire was often treated as a normal part of social life, especially in certain city-states and elite circles. In Athens, all-male drinking parties called symposia were places where men drank, debated, performed, flirted, and talked about love. Greek art, poetry, and philosophy are filled with male beauty. Not quietly, not accidentally, openly. Plato's Symposium, one of the most famous philosophical texts ever written, is basically a dinner party where men sit around trying to explain love after drinking. Which, if we are being honest, is still how many bad podcasts begin. In that text and others, male love is discussed as powerful, noble, dangerous, inspiring, embarrassing, divine, and the Greeks even had myths where gods desired beautiful young men, like Zeus and Ganymede, or Apollo and Hyacinthus. These were not hidden in some secret underground fan fiction archive. They were part of the mythological imagination. But here is the part people often miss. Ancient Greek same-sex relationships were not the same as modern queer relationships. Many were structured by age, education, citizenship, and power. Some involved relationships between older men and younger males in ways that do not fit modern ideas of equality or consent. So you cannot simply say, ancient Greece was progressive. That is too easy. But you also cannot say, same-sex love was always hated until modern times. That is even more wrong. Ancient Greece shows us something more uncomfortable. A society can accept same-sex desire in one form and still be unfair, sexist, hierarchical, and full of rules. History rarely gives us clean heroes. It gives us people. And Sparta was a military society where boys were raised to become soldiers, and bonds between men were considered important for courage and discipline. Other Greek writers often connected love between warriors with bravery in battle. The most famous example is not actually Spartan, but Theban. The Sacred Band of Thebes was an elite military unit made up of pairs of male lovers. The idea was simple. A soldier would fight harder beside someone he loved. Not beside a motivational poster, not beside a manager saying, "We are like a family," beside the actual person he could not bear to disappoint. The Sacred Band became famous for its strength and discipline, and according to ancient sources, it fought with extraordinary bravery until it was destroyed by the forces of Philip II of Macedon. That story became one of the clearest ancient examples of same-sex love being connected not to weakness, but to courage. So history quietly opens a book and starts laughing. But Greece was only one chapter. Rome took many Greek ideas and then made them Roman, which usually means adding law, status, empire, and a terrifying amount of confidence. The Romans did not think about sexuality the way modern people do. A Roman man was expected to marry, have children, run a household, and protect his public reputation. But that did not necessarily stop him from having male lovers. The question was not, "Are you attracted to men?" The question was, "Are you still acting like a dominant Roman man?" Which is somehow both ancient and extremely Roman. Roman sexual morality was obsessed with status. A free adult male was judged less for the gender of his partner and more for whether he maintained power, masculinity, and social control. This is not the same as acceptance in the modern sense. It was not equality. It was not love is love. It was love is fine as long as the social. But within that system, male-male desire was everywhere in literature, art, gossip, politics, and imperial life. Rome was less worried about orientation and more worried about dominance. Then came Hadrian and Antinous. Hadrian ruled the Roman Empire from 117 to 138 CE. He was one of the most powerful men on earth. Antinous was a young man from Bithynia in what is now Turkey. He became Hadrian's companion and lover. When Antinous drowned in the Nile in 130 CE, Hadrian's grief became public, imperial, and enormous. He founded the city of Antinopolis. He promoted the worship of Antinous. Statues of Antinous spread across the empire. Coins and images preserved his face. Imagine being so heartbroken that your response is, "I am going to turn my boyfriend into a god." Most people just delete old photos. Hadrian built a cult. That does not mean Rome was modern or equal, but it does show something important. A same-sex love could be visible, not unimaginable, public, monumental, literally carved in marble. Then there is Sappho. Female desire is harder to see in ancient sources because history has a bad habit of letting men write everything down and then acting surprised when women are missing. But Sappho breaks through that silence. She lived on the island of Lesbos around the late 7th and early 6th century BCE, and her poetry speaks about longing, beauty, jealousy, desire, and love, including love for women. Her work was so powerful that later history gave us the words lesbian and sapphic. Ancient biography is often gossip wearing a toga, so we do not know every detail of her life. But her poetry gave female desire a voice that survived for over 2,000 years. Now, if we move east, we find another world that complicates the story. In pre-modern Japan, especially before the Meiji period, male-male love was documented in elite. The Japanese term nanshoku, often translated as male colors or male love, appeared in literature and social life. Again, this was not modern LGBTQ equality. There were age, status, class, and gender expectations. But it was not simply treated as alien or impossible. In some contexts, it was aesthetic. In others, spiritual, theatrical, or connected to warrior culture. The point is not that old Japan was secretly a perfect queer utopia. The point is that history was never as straight as people pretend. It had categories we do not use anymore, rules we would reject now, and relationships that existed openly because nobody had yet built the exact modern system of panic around them. Now let's talk about gender. Because if the question is, what was the gayest time in history? We can not only talk about who loved whom. We also have to talk about people who did not fit neatly into male or female roles. One of the best-known examples today is the Two-Spirit traditions of many indigenous North American cultures. Two-Spirit is a modern umbrella term, adopted by Native people in 1990, and it should not be used as if every indigenous culture was the same. They were not. Different nations had their own words, roles, meanings, and rules. But across many indigenous cultures, people who combined masculine and feminine roles could hold respected places as artists, healers, spiritual figures, mediators, or specialized workers. Among the Navajo, the term Nadlihi has been used for a person who embodies a changing or transforming gender role. Some cultures recognize 3, 4, or more gender categories. And this is where the modern brain short-circuits. Because many people today imagine gender diversity as a new idea. But in many places, the strict two-box system was the thing that arrived. Missionaries, governments, boarding schools, and colonial laws attacked gender-diverse traditions across indigenous communities. They did not discover a world with no queer people. They found societies with their own systems and tried to force them into European categories. That is a very different story. Not modern people invented gender diversity, but modern colonial systems often tried to erase gender diversity that was already there. In South Asia, the Hijra community also shows how old and complex gender diversity can be. Hijras are often described as a third gender or gender non-conforming community in the Indian subcontinent. Their history stretches back centuries, with documented roles during the Delhi Sultanate and Mughal Empire. Some Hijras served in courts, households, religious settings, administration, and even positions of political trust. In the 19th century, colonial authorities passed laws that criminalized and stigmatized Hijras, including the Criminal Tribes Act of 1871. So again, the story is not, the old world was always strict and the modern world became free. Sometimes the old world had categories that colonial modernity tried to destroy. History is annoying like that. It refuses to fit slogans. So which period was the best? Was it ancient Greece? Maybe, if you were a free male citizen in the right city, class, and role. Was it Rome? Maybe, if you had status and did not violate Roman ideas of masculinity. Was it pre-modern Japan? Maybe, in certain elite, artistic, religious, or warrior contexts. Was it indigenous North America or South Asia? Maybe, in cultures where gender-diverse people held recognized roles before colonial disruption. The honest answer is, there was no single gayest period. And almost every one of those worlds came with limits. Some accepted male-male desire but ignored women. Some accepted same-sex behavior but not equal relationships. Some honored gender-variant people spiritually but still gave them strict roles. So if you are looking for a perfect past, you will not find one. But if you are looking for proof that queer people have always existed, you will find it everywhere. In poems, myths, statues, court records, religious roles, insults, love stories, and laws trying to stop something that clearly already existed. That last part is important. If a society passes laws against something, that usually means people were doing it. Governments do not ban imaginary problems. Well, sometimes they do. But not for thousands of years across multiple continents. The bigger truth is this. Queer history is not a straight line from darkness to light. It is a messy map. There are periods of visibility, then silence. Periods where same-sex love is celebrated in art while ordinary people still live under harsh rules. That is why saying the past was traditional is almost meaningless. Which past? Whose tradition? Ancient Athens? Imperial Rome? Pre-modern Japan? Navajo gender systems? Mughal courts? Victorian Britain? A 1950s suburb? People usually say traditional when they mean the version of history I was taught when I was 12. But history is much bigger and much stranger than that. And maybe that is why this topic feels so viral, because it flips the normal story. We are told the modern world invented queerness, but the evidence says the opposite. The modern world invented many of the categories, labels, medical terms, legal systems, and political fights. But the people, the love, the desire, and the gender variation were already there, long before the rainbow. Long before social media profiles, dating apps, pride parades, culture wars, and comment sections filled with men named Gary who have very strong opinions about ancient Greece, there were people writing poems to women, warriors fighting beside male lovers, emperors mourning men, artists carving beautiful male bodies, and communities recognizing more than two gender roles. And then later, in many places, new systems arrived and said, no, there are only two boxes, pick one, and love the correct person. But human beings have never been that simple. That might be the real answer. The gayest time in history was not one empire, one century, or one city. It was every time humans were honest enough to admit that love, desire, and gender do not always obey the rules people write for them. Sometimes that honesty appeared in marble, poetry, ritual, gossip, or a law. Sometimes in a statue of Antinous, staring out from the Roman world with a face so carefully preserved that you can still see what grief made an emperor do. And sometimes in a few broken lines from Sappho, where a woman from an island over 2,000 years ago describes desire so clearly that modern readers still feel it. So no, LGBTQ people are not a modern trend. The labels are modern, the politics are modern, the internet arguments are painfully modern. But the people were always there, and history did not hide them because they were rare. History hid them because later generations often did not know what to do with them. But on vases, in poems, in temples, in armies, in courts, in myths, and in communities that remembered gender differently before outsiders forced them to forget. And that is what makes this story so strange. The past was not less queer, it was differently queer. And sometimes, in some places, it was more open about that than people are willing to admit.